You've built a framework. You've built a thing that I think ties together lots of advisor conversations you and I have been having for a long time now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm Zach Conway here with Kelsey McKenna. Kelsey, I feel like this is a big moment for you.
For me?
We've been building toward this for a while now. This is the thing that's dominated your life for a couple of months. It's the culmination of many conversations and debates. It is talking about advisor growth, but in a very sort of structured way. You've built a framework. You've built a thing that I think ties together lots of advisor conversations you and I have been having for a long time now. So what is it? What have you been working on? Why are you so excited about this?
I like how you're making this seem like some big moment when we've actually specifically referenced this on like 3 different episodes, because I've been chipping away at this for so long.
Well, that's what I mean. It's been a long time coming,
it's been a long time coming, as we say. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think what happened was toward the end of last year, something just sort of clicked for me when I was thinking about like our own business here at Seeds and how really what we're doing in these early stages is identifying like how do we prioritize resources? What do we put resources on? Like what do we absolutely have to unblock next and work on next to really continue to grow or to meet our goals? And it goes back to the question I always ask, which is like, what kind of company would we need to be able to do whatever it is that we're saying we're going to do next year, next quarter, over the next 5 years, whatever. And I think something just clicked because I've had so many conversations with I'll call them like early stage advisor founders about how they're struggling with how to prioritize their own resources, whether that resource is just themselves or they're considering outsourcing something, they're considering buying a new piece of technology. All of that is kind of, it's the same problem, is really like, how do I allocate the limited resources that I have to get the biggest impact? And I think something just clicked where suddenly some things we were talking about internally mixed with things externally, mixed with what I'm always constantly consuming, which is like business startup content via podcasts and books. And I just felt like there was an opportunity to kind of distill down different types of constraints that advisors face in their early stages of the growth and help advisors kind of self-identify or self-categorize into those different buckets, so that they can kind of, make a decision to be more focused on a specific issue for a shorter period of time to really unblock that issue and move on. And I think the reason that's important, I guess, is just because I've noticed a trend of just wanting to solve everything. And what ends up happening is chipping away like tiny little chips, in at the problem, because you're spreading yourself across trying to be like the best marketer and then figuring out how to be the best salesperson and also build a team and also, do all these hire for the first time and manage people. And it's just like at a startup, it's just actually more limited in many ways because many startups are venture backed. So you can actually do more than one thing at once you hit a certain point. So anyway, yeah, that was my kind of moment late last year. And since then, I've been kind of working through the details of how to like really narrowly define specifically each constraint. How do you kind of identify which is the right next one to tackle? So taking what I've been doing one-to-one with advisors and trying to make it a little more scalable so that it can be available to people in our network and people who listen to this podcast, basically.
And I think that's what's exciting. And when I say culmination, the premise of the podcast and the last now 2 years of our lives in the business at Seeds and building what we are building, how those learnings we think apply to advisory firms and how advisors are building these businesses. And there's so much there. We've learned so much, and trying to come up with something that's really tangible that kind of synthesizes these key issues across a business as you're trying to build it. I think that's what the culmination is. The fact that you've now produced this thing that really summarizes and brings to life some of the main constraints in the early days of building something. that, again, we've witnessed in our own building of seeds and we think apply to firms. And I think the other sort of thing that ties it together is this diagnosis component that you should kind of unpack and kind of lay out the structure of what you've put together. But that, I think, is also what we've realized and talked a lot about over the last, many episodes, and what we're learning internally is you have to do that. It's of course obvious when you say it, but you have to do that diagnosis step. You have to take the time to look at what's going on and really kind of face the facts of what's holding you back. And so once you do that, first of all, how do you do that? What are you even looking at? And then tying that to solutions. So being able to kind of categorize, again, sort of synthesize these key areas, these key pain points. How would you even analyze how you're performing in those areas? And then based on that diagnosis, what are you going to do about it? So again, now having that framework, I'm excited about it. That's what I'm excited for.
Are you? I've been curious because I feel like I've been the one pushing this so heavily.
Well, yeah,
to prioritize this.
You know what it is? I'm jealous. You have you built the thing,
well,
and
You know what? I think like why I have struggled early on in this, I was definitely struggling to prioritize it because I was thinking to myself, this is a huge task. Like anyone listening, you're probably thinking, okay, so you've distilled down the key problems that an early stage firm can face, and then you've created a tool to help somebody self-diagnose.
And you'd say, yeah, I did.
And
exactly.
I did. We'll see how well it works. But what I realized is that even if it doesn't work perfectly in this version 1 in terms of the diagnostic, I have done it in a way where I do think even if it's not perfect, it's going to be much better than nothing. Like it's going to provide value. And the reason for that is because even if, say, there's 2 constraints facing you and maybe the diagnostic triggers one and not the other, you know what I mean? Either way, having a more focused approach, I believe, always wins. And if you have 2 problems and you solve 1 problem instead of not solving 2 problems, I think that's a win, especially early on. So it is definitely worth noting that if you're early, it's really about the limited resources and the constraint of those resources, specifically not even monetary alone, but time and focus of the founder or the leader that's taking the assessment. So yeah, to your question of like what it is. So I've got the 5 primary constraints, and then I've created a quiz basically to identify what is the top constraint that you face that you should solve, and not saying solve it perfectly, but solve just enough to unblock it, to move on to the next one, and to continue to grow and to continue to just know where to focus your time. Not to over-engineer anything or to just like do too much in one area, but to shift your resources as you're continuing to grow to solve the next problem as much as you need to move on. And the reason that that's important is because I've noticed like there's one issue of wanting to do everything, and I see that a lot, but I also see founders who have a strength, and so they just keep doubling down, tripling down on the thing that they're good at. So maybe they're really good at planning and building out the best framework for that, but they don't love prospecting. They don't love marketing, right? So they just continue to do the thing that they're drawn to or that they feel they can do without ever problem solving and figuring out, what do I do about this other issue? How do I get this moving enough to be able to then afford to hire someone to do this or outsource it? So I guess that was why I believe that even if it's not perfect in this phase 1, we're going to get feedback on this, I'm sure, but even if it's not perfect, it still is enough to get you going. I do believe, as someone who's kind of a generalist, and you've seen my work here at Seeds, I love working across the business, across marketing, sales, success, even working with product, dev, engineering, ops. I love looking across all of those things and figuring out how they're tied together and how you can remove blockers across all of those different areas. So trying to kind of just find a way to distill that down and have you as the founder self-reflect and say, oh yeah, I do spend too much time on that, or I'm spending all my time on that, or I'm not spending enough time there, so that you can then say, okay, then this is the place to focus for the next 3 months. And then what we'll do is deliver, here's a guide with just to get you started, to get you moving in this area. So that's what I've been working on and building kind of on the side, mostly at night because I do have like a full day job here. But I'm really excited to put it out and start getting feedback on it because I'm hoping that it at least provides kind of like what I do here at Seeds in a mini version to all the firms that I work with one-to-one, but also to other firms who I haven't worked with or haven't spoken to yet.
I actually wanted to touch on that point, and then we'll get into the actual constraints,
Yeah.
the diagnostic process and each of the constraints and kind of walk through each constraint. But from our seat at Seeds in working with advisory firms to hopefully become customers of ours, our perspective is that technology in general is not a silver bullet. But a lot of technology companies will say that they are. And, I think what we're trying to do with firms as customers is say, this technology solution solves hopefully a significant amount of pain within these parts of your business. But before we even get to that, if you are constrained and not being able, not able to grow, not able to do these sort of foundational things for your business, if we're not helping you address those things, it's actually not in our best interest to not help you fix those other things that our technology is not necessarily directly helping you solve. But we do think, it's good for business. It's good for us. But I do think, advisors are constantly hit with this technology solution is going to fundamentally change your business. Well, maybe to a certain degree, but unless you're also getting all these other things right foundationally, maybe not so much. And I'll also say, just in general, we see a lot of, how to get to the next level of AUM and all these sort of things that advisors get hit with, maybe not from technology companies, that again are so cursory, that are so surface level. And then you end up sort of chasing shiny objects anyway, right? I need this marketing solution. I need this consulting thing. I need this whatever. And again, some of those point solutions can be beneficial. They can help in certain areas, but it's like, it's a sugar fix. It's not actually really getting to some of these root cause things. So long way of saying this guide that you've created is ultimately self-serving to us as a business and our business model. But also I think it doesn't, I do think it's rare. I don't know that, advisors get this level of tangible, specific diagnosis to solutioning from technology companies or, even consulting
like for
firms
free
and so on.
Yeah. And I think the question is, because I've running this by some members on the team, the question is like, well, why don't you charge for these services? And we're not a consulting agency, although sometimes we feel like a consulting agency for the reason that you just described, which is like we want our advisor firms to be very successful. We want them to grow. We want them to achieve whatever their vision is. And we want to be a part of that. And it's obviously somewhat selfish. We are basis points on AUM. So as they grow, we grow with them. So it's not like a SaaS model. We've talked about that before. But ultimately, I think one of the challenges that I ran into really early on in my career here, working with our early customers, and also with people who didn't become customers fully, but who could have become customers if they really had the problem that we're trying to solve. The problem we're trying to solve comes up if you are growing, if things are working. If something is going right, then you run into, I actually need Seeds and I have a pressing, urgent need for something like Seeds. So really, this is very, very selfish because I want to create more of those firms prior to the one-on-one. I want to have more firms that are independent, that are out there with advisor founders with big visions, that are growing without having to spend, every dollar on so much technology and so much consulting and all this stuff. Like, I want to help provide the basic fundamental stuff that I've seen work across firms. So with so much exposure to so many early stage firms, you get a real clear sense of who's continuing to figure it out and who's stalling. And I've definitely noticed trends there. So I want to get that out in front of people because selfishly, I want people coming to us saying, oh my gosh, I'm growing so fast. I've figured this out enough. And now I need to outsource this part, or I need help with this operational complexity, or I need help with refining this experience and making it more consistent. That's what we want. So I do think from the outside, it seems crazy to be like, why would you spend all this time and also all these resources and just give this away for free? And at the end of the day, I really believe, and I've advised advisors to do this, but I know it's hard. give away some of your best stuff for free. Build that trust. If you have something valuable that's not your core offering that you know would resonate with your audience, that's a great lead magnet. You give me your email, I'm going to over deliver because I want you to know that if you actually give me your business, if you give me the business that we're talking about, then I'm going to over deliver on that too. Like, that's kind of the point, is to say, like, here, take this, like, take some of the best stuff that I've got, take it for an email. I want you to be successful so that as soon as it starts working, you look at us and you say, oh, wow, like that was really valuable. What else do you got? So that was kind of long-winded, but it's truly very selfish, to be honest.
And again, I think, to the same point, it is, again, we'll get feedback as it goes out into the world here. But my view is that the tangible value that will come out of this is immense comparatively to, what advisors typically get, quote unquote, for free in terms of guidance around trying to figure out their issues and build their businesses. So, but yes, it is self-serving, and advisors should take that, should take that example, to your point, and use it in their own business. All right. So let's talk about, what is this sort of diagnostic process? What does that look like? And then we can start to talk about, on the other side of the diagnosis, what are the sort of buckets of diagnoses? And then we'll get into, the problem solving side.
Yeah. And we want to keep this kind of tight, but of course, within a week or two of this release of this episode, we're going to have this out there. There's going to be information out there that you can find on our website. But basically, the diagnostic tool itself is just going to be like a quiz, just like any other lead magnet you see on websites, where you're just kind of answering questions about your business. And those questions span the primary 5 constraint categories that I've created. And then at the end of that quiz, it's going to tell you basically what your primary constraint is. So we'll run through those 5. If you score low across all 5 areas, there is a 6th bucket, which is like, actually, you just need to invest in the right places and remove the right points of friction to kind of scale this up. Like, you're ready to kind of really invest in what's working and invest in removing kind of any friction points to create that flywheel that everybody wants. So there is a 6th category, I guess is the point. There's also kind of like tiebreakers built in of like, if these 2 things tie, I know that you need to solve this one first. It's better to focus here first. So that's also accommodated for in the diagnostic, but it's fairly short. It's not going to take a super long time to get through. So basically, any founder could just take that and answer it honestly from their perspective of what's going on in their business right now. And then there are 5 primary constraints that come out of that as results, and then that 6th category. So do you think we should just walk through briefly what they are?
Yeah, touch on just for a second for clarity. Again, like the point of the this is trying to help advisors surface the most fundamental blocker. Mm-hmm. Right. And you already said this in this conversation, but there could be several things that need to get addressed. And I actually think like that's part of the point where advisors may be somewhat self-aware, but everything looks like a problem. And so then you're stuck at this, you can't move forward because there's too much in your way. Part of the point of the diagnostic is not to just score you in these different categories, but actually then lead to, okay, what should you tackle first? How do you prioritize these issues?
Yeah, most firms that I've worked with have symptoms across all of these areas in the early stages. So it's definitely worth noting. And it's funny because if you look at, Seeds as a startup, we have symptoms across all of these areas. And I do think that's totally normal, but that's kind of the point of this. The point is that if you are an early firm and resources are limited, you cannot solve all your problems. You're going to have just problems. Growth is problems. Like, you're literally just creating more and more problems as you grow. And so knowing which ones to solve and when and what strategically makes the most sense is super important. And that is exactly the point of this, is to instead of you downloading a big long guide that basically gives you tips across all of these, the whole point is to say, focus here first. Here's very specific tactical advice in this one area. And once you're feeling good here and you feel unblocked here, take the quiz again. See what comes up for you then once you feel like things have changed. Or just, go to us and ask us for the other one. If you want to see another one, feel free. But the point is to help you focus on the thing that's going to move the needle the most or get you the most ROI the fastest, so that you can start building momentum and move on to other areas. as you grow.
Constraint number one.
Constraint number one. I feel like we should talk about let's talk about the capacity constraint first. That's the one we should focus on first. So
what does it mean?
The capacity constraint, I call this one the founder bottleneck. You're very familiar with this one. This one is where you can't take on any more clients because you are overloaded and you're stretched thin, even though you have a team. So this one assumes that you already have some resources at your disposal, which the diagnostic will take into account. But basically, if you're the only person in your company, of course you are the bottleneck. But as soon as you start to grow, I definitely have noticed a trend of that advisor still needing to be in every room, in every major decision, overseeing every process, having every customer conversation. And so essentially, you're growing to a point where then you are so overwhelmed that you have no mental capacity or space or time or energy to focus on growing the business and what does the business need next. So you're so in the weeds and in it with your team. And typically you also start to sense in this one some frustration around the team. So why I've hired all these people, like what's going on? Why am I not reaching the next level? And truly the business can't grow past you because the business is you, basically. So those are some of the symptoms.
There's a tie-in here. We could go in a bunch of different ways, but to in advisory businesses where your value prop is tied to a certain degree on you as the personality. So it's you've created that sort of experience issue where the expectation is you are the person in the room. Right, it's both all the front stage customer experience stuff. That's what the customers came to expect. This isn't a team support experience. It's you, and all the internal. Again, to your point, even though you may have internal resources, are you really actually assigning things to do across the people you've actually put in the business?
Yeah,
so it can be both pieces.
Yeah, and the point that you first made is interesting, and we'll touch back on that when we talk about one of the other constraints, because there is certainly the client experience, like the client-facing constraint, which becomes a problem. Typically earlier than that, there is a problem of you've hired some people to support you, and there is a challenge around receiving that help, either whether that's delegation and accountability, or even creating space to effectively run the team that you're building. That can also be a challenge because you're so overwhelmed with the decision making and the client stuff. So they are definitely tied together. The client's expecting you to be in the room. You can make it farther than you think, still being the figurehead or like the person who's in every meeting. You can definitely make it pretty far that way. But yes, eventually you do need to take the value that people get from you and figure out how to distill that and spread that across your business and your marketing and your brand so that people feel they are working with a business and not with you, which is going to come up in one of the other constraints, which is the value prop constraint as well. But yeah, so a lot of this one is about figuring out, how to get the most out of the people that you have hired and how to take space. And then what do you do with that time? That's the other piece of this one that I see a lot. You start to actually delegate effectively and you have time. And then instead of taking that time and focusing on more strategic things and growth related things, you focus on the things you like. You're doubling down on the things that you enjoy. Maybe you're in the weeds in some operational thing. Maybe you're buying new tech. Maybe you're, going to more conferences or like industry events or whatever, consuming more content, but you're not actually then reallocating that time to things that you as the founder, only you can do really as the founder of the business.
Well, and just having those things actually tied together, right? It's if you figure out how to get people functionally helping to run the business and then you're off on tangents, then there's no sort of flywheel thing happening. Then you're coming back to the team without things that actually align with the day-to-day that you've put in place. It's, I want to go do this new thing or whatever.
Yeah, distractions. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm a I've done that.
You have?
That might be part of my issue. Yeah, so where it's a fine line, right? If you have more capacity to be quote unquote strategic and looking forward, there's pulling that strategy back into the team and what does that mean, and then trying to make it tangible. And then there's like lobbing in distractions, and those are two different things.
Yeah, and knowing which team members you can engage in like some things that are farther out. You know what I mean? Because I do think that's another piece of this is like you should be thinking about the future. You should be being strategic about that, but you have to make sure that you're laying the tracks for the train that's coming for your team. And I think that's the core thing here is making sure you know how to delegate outcomes, not just tasks, and you know how to manage to those outcomes, and then you know how to lay the tracks as the leader so that as the train starts moving, there are tracks to run on. And I think that's, while you're still working client relations, that balance of slowly redefining your role as you grow.
Should we go to the next one, which I think is, as you said, kind of aligned, the team constraint?
Yeah. So the team constraint, these two I think are similar in many ways, or they may be perceived from the outside as similar, but I broke them into two because I do think it's very different skill sets almost and very different experience that you need to be good at these. This one I hear a lot of anxiety around, actually, probably the most of all of these I hear around what I call the team constraint. So the team constraint is you know that you need to build a team. So you've gotten it this far. You're probably solo or you have some helper person, you have something happening where you're a small contained team. You know you need to start building if you're going to sustain the level of growth that you're experiencing. And you have to build a little bit ahead of that growth. But there is anxiety around who to hire, how to scope the role. How do you adjust your current team if you have one or your own role to accommodate that hire and make them successful as they come on board? And this is critical because for a lot of these independent firms, they have a big vision. And there's almost like this denial point I notice where people are like, no, I'm never going to hire. Like, I'm going to just do this. I got into this because I want to serve clients and I have this big vision and I'm going to do it. But they don't actually like think about what that means on the people side of the business. And I don't think there are super great resources, at least that I've found on this topic in the industry, where how do you be an advisor founder who's leading a growing independent firm? How do you build that infrastructure? For startups, there's a ton of content because this is like the core foundational truth of startups is you must grow. You must grow. You must seek growth. And so to do that, you need the right people. You need to be building something. You need to be supporting that growth. You need to be getting feedback. But that's just not always the case with firms. A lot of times there's lifestyle businesses or you could go plug in somewhere or whatever. But if you actually want to stay independent, this is a very critical skill to build.
Yeah, having an org chart structure that actually feeds into the vision of what you're trying to accomplish over the next several years. And we see this tendency of, okay, skill gap, bandwidth stretched on administrative needs, go hire, an administrative person, which is can be partially effective, but it doesn't really tie together how that bigger picture thing is going to come to life over the next few years. How is that person going to have another person roll into that part of the org? What other people in different parts of the business are you going to need to support more growth? Zooming out and trying to think through that future org structure, and then how the practical process of hiring is, and we've had multiple episodes just on this topic, but is so broken, I think, in this space of there is no process, right? There's no, I had an advisor reach out, with a job rec that was 3 sentences long that they were posting on one, job posting site that wasn't clear as to what they were looking for. And they're desperate for bandwidth to unlock growth. And it's like, how do you write a job rec? Where do you post it? Mm-hmm. Shouldn't you be proactively recruiting for certain roles? How are you going to screen these people? Who's going to be in the interview process? Again, it feels sometimes extraneous, like, oh, I don't need to do all that. I can just post and I'll get an intro from so-and-so. And, we have learned at Seeds, I've learned in our advisory business, like that process is more than worth having in place to get, to know what you're hiring for and then to get the right people in the right seats. So that's a big one. The team constraint. And again, like we've already said, but just about everybody has some amount of that symptom, I would say, at least who we've spoken with.
For sure. And this is one of the easiest ones to just kind of Band-Aid, I think, to your point, because there is a pressure typically. Like typically you wait too long to think about this and you're scrambling, and that is where you run into trouble because you're desperate. You don't want to slow down. And if you've never done it before, you don't want to slow down and like figure out how to do this the best way. You kind of just think you can stumble your way through it. You only need one person right now, that sort of thing. But to your point, this is one of my most robust guides because it takes you all the way through like, let's go big picture. Where are we going vision-wise in the business? Where's your job going? Which is a huge thing that most people miss. Like, who do you want to be in 2 years as the leader in this org? Because we're building around you. You're not changing. And now we're getting down into how do we define the role? What's the level? How do we post it in a way that's going to resonate with the right candidate in terms of what language we're using and how we are laying out that job description? Where are we posting it? When do we use an outsourced recruiting agency or not? So tips there. And then how do we go through that interview process? What are some things that you should definitely avoid? How should you structure an interview process? All the way through to selecting the candidate and setting a 30, 60, 90-day plan. So this is a very robust guide. And the reason for that, I told you this earlier today, but I had the very unique experience at a very young age of hiring like hundreds of people into a high growth org. And so there are so many lessons embedded in there. If you see the repetition, that if you hire once a year, it's going to take you 20 years to learn these things unless you are willing to just be honest. Like, I don't do this a lot. I might just want to use some best practices and go out and like just stick with it and be really like diligent about the process.
The last thing I'll mention, because we got to crank through 3 more. I do think firms are also sort of jaded by the status quo of, we see a lot like primary rainmaker financial advisor support person who does like the administrative account opening work. And so you see that sort of like very simple org chart structure, and then you outsource some marketing stuff. I think just like really taking a step back and trying to think creatively about if I have talent, if I have what is talent? If I'm growing my business, there isn't necessarily at that stage this like finite administrative person role.
Mm-hmm.
What am I really trying to unblock? Again, it goes back to the basics, sort of like what is that org chart? Not because that's how org charts historically have looked in independent wealth advisory businesses, but because it actually gets you to where you're trying to go. So not being kind of beholden to, I'm an advisor, I need an ops person dynamic, but thinking about what could someone who's multifaceted and can help move things forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Especially because every hire builds on the next. You know what I mean? Like you do have to be thinking further out as you hire, because if you're growing, you will continue to have to hire.
Okay. Capacity, founder capacity, building a team.
Mm-hmm.
What's the third?
So let's maybe talk about value prop constraint next, because this is one that kind of falls into the marketing bucket a lot of times. Like it gets seen as something you would just kind of like do or outsource to a marketing agency. But I have a fairly different take on this if you want to really figure out how to grow effectively. And I do see this impacting a lot of firms that I work with. So this is really like the constraint where you are struggling to attract your ideal clients, or sometimes it can come across as you're struggling with a lot of questions around fees and pricing. And that's because you're not clearly enough articulating your value to your ideal customer and then bringing that value to life in the services that you offer and continuing to kind of feed that cycle. So this doesn't just like make you struggle with positioning. It makes you struggle with decision making as well, and prioritization. Because if you don't know what you're aiming at, then every new client that you somehow acquire is defining, to some extent, your roadmap and your service offering. So this becomes very, very messy, very fast if you don't take a pause after you have acquired some clients and you don't just stop for a second and say, hey, what are you buying me for? Like, what do you appreciate about what I have going on here? So there's kind of 2 points of reflection. It's like, what are the clients that I enjoy working with that are really going well, that I feel like I have the best relationship with? What's unique about them? And who am I talking to, as I go to market with this offering? And then the other is, what do they actually appreciate about me? How do they interpret me? And then how do I build that core? So basically my constraint guide on this helps you go down to that value statement. And then how are we building this into our company so that this isn't about me? This isn't just like, I like working with Zach because Zach is a great guy and he listens to me and he's really smart and I really trust him. Like, that can't be the value prop. The value prop itself has to be the distilled down pieces of value that they're getting that can then be built into your client experience. And then you can just talk about it. And you can go then get a marketing agency and they can help you with messaging and massaging it and the brand and all of that. But it's about that core fundamental truth. And that's the biggest thing with this one, is that a lot of times firms I notice are just going to market with a value prop that is like widely used to some extent in the market without regard to who it is for and if it's actually true in their business. And then they're wondering why referrals aren't coming in and they're wondering why things aren't resonating. It's because there's a fundamental mismatch between what's going on in the business and who you're talking to. And so even if you have it's like the lipstick on a pig, even if you have a great message, if they come through your sales process or they look at your content or they look at your website and there's a mismatch between what they get when they talk to you and what they see, that's also going to stall growth, basically.
I think this is really, really, really oversimplifying, but I think where firms struggle is you need to start with something. Mm-hmm. What is your value that is arguably differentiated and how are you expressing it through your messaging? That's going to be imperfect by default.
Yeah.
But you need to take a stab at, before it's copy and paste another message you've seen elsewhere, do that initial work of what is it really that I and my team can bring to the table that is why a customer is going to actually pay money for our services. It's going to be imperfect. Then you're going to get customers, and we've talked about a lot, like the irony is people aren't just going to start walking in your door. So the initial sales, we've also made the point of like, they will be scrappy, wrangle people, pull them in the door, mm-hmm. that may and very likely will be an imperfect match to whatever you put on your website about your value proposition on day one. That's like step 2, right? Pull people in. The thing that then is the hardest part is what you just said, which is then iterating toward a consistent value prop that you're getting that feedback from customers and starting to hone, okay, this is what resonates. This is what these people are paying me for. I want to recreate that customer and that customer and that customer, not this customer. That kind of was a nightmare and they didn't value what I was doing in that area. This is why these people are paying me this money. That's where even early growth firms, that's where the sort of stutter stuff, both early growth firms. And then I would say even like in our business, in our wealth business, like the sort of next phase of growth, yeah. If you're a firm that maybe has a core book of business and it's sort of the second phase of growth, maybe succession plan, you're taking over a book of business, that is therefore that much more critical, right? There's a client base that's paying money. Is that the same customer demographic and value prop that you're going to continue to express? And if it's not, you have to make that adjustment quickly.
Well, and you're bringing up a key point that I don't think we talked about at the beginning, which is that these constraints pop up over and over. And that's the point. Right. That's why I'm saying solve it enough. I never recommend to allocating too many resources to something when it's not necessary at that point in time. And one of the reasons this one gives me stress putting it out is because we are right in the middle as a business at Seeds, right in the middle of another iteration on this, which is like we have absorbed so much feedback. We have talked to so many people and we are now going again through this cycle and we will go through it again. Probably in a few years, we likely will to some extent. And that's because there is it's fed by the customers. And that's the biggest point that I'm making that I don't see made enough in the industry. But what the guide on this really goes through is like, this is about it being true and it being informed by real people and not just informed by what you believe your value is and that cyclical nature of those two things.
You get customers and then referrals of those customers, and all of a sudden you feel yourself pulled, delivering something that you actually think is antithetical to your core value, but the snowball has snowballed.
Yeah.
So it is, constantly trying to realign that forever.
Yeah, forever. And it's not like you're spending time on this every day, but you need to get enough moving to go out to the market and say, this is who I am, and attract more of the right fit customers and get their feedback. And this ties into another constraint, which is the growth engine constraint. But the reason I wanted to highlight it first is because a lot of people think they have an engine issue. And so they spend a lot on social media and content marketing, and maybe they're doing a bunch of events and whatnot, and they do it too early, before they've taken that pause or that little moment to just say, because you're right, there is that growth engine constraint at the beginning. I just have to go out and get my first few customers. That's growth engine. Now we're flipping back to value prop. Whoa, what did I learn? How do I talk about this? What do people actually care about? What are they paying me for? How do I message that in a way that's not confusing or scary? And now we're going back to growth engine. How do I broaden that message? How do I say, this is the experience I'm delivering? Now we're growth engine. Now our leads are coming in. We're cycling back. How do we now spread that to the team? How do we make sure we as a business are delivering that value, not just me?
You just made me think, and then we'll go to growth engine. But you just made me think, you said something earlier about when you take the diagnostic, you have to be honest.
Yeah.
And I actually think that is actually right, that because we do delude ourselves sometimes of, for example, my value prop is incredible. It resonates. Getting referrals, and there's partial truth probably in that often. But I do think like that harder look at to that point, then, okay, well, why isn't this working? If you're pouring money into marketing, for example, and it's not clicking, then that's, you have to hold yourself to maybe not that. So taking the diagnostic and really trying to, abstract away your presumptions about yourself and your own business to a certain degree, and really, really gut check it as best you can.
Yeah, I tried to make it very design it around symptoms so that you can self-identify a real symptom of this versus like just straight up asking if you think your value prop resonates. So like, for example, with this, a symptom might be you are getting at bats with leads, whether they're referrals or they're coming through marketing engine or whatever. You're getting at bats, but they are not closing, or your close rate is pretty low, or they're taking a very long time to close, or you're having to do a lot of justification on the fees and like how much you charge. Those would all be like examples of symptoms here, along with the more obvious ones. Like, I don't know how to like say what my value is, like very basic stuff. But even if you think you have a value prop, there's other things you can look at and measure to see, okay, maybe this is an area that I could improve. And the great thing about this one is a very like low budget. You can typically greatly improve this pretty quickly, because a lot of it's just you reflecting, talking to your customers, figuring out a first step. And then if it starts to work, you can go out and pay someone else with the skills to really like polish that up. You know what I mean?
Yes. Okay.
Growth
value
engine.
prop ties to growth engine.
Yeah, all of these tie together in some way, my brain, but these two I think get kind of mushed together a lot. So growth engine for me, this constraint is you just don't have a predictable, repeatable way to attract and convert the right type of clients. So maybe you do know how to talk about what you do, and maybe you do know how to do that in a way that resonates one-to-one, but you don't know how to get in front of the right clients and build up that pipeline of people who are consistently coming to you to explore that offering and then close them, really. And the reason that this one I think is interesting is because I think a lot of people don't realize how big of it. People focus on this a lot, but I think they're almost focusing on the wrong symptom of it. Like they think that, oh, if I just like pour market, like I just need more leads. But they don't realize that there's so many other business like implications of not having consistent lead flow. Because sometimes you'll hear someone say, well, I'll just like take the next one. Like I get referrals, right? But referrals could be very spotty. You might get 3 in 1 month. You might get 0 for 3 more months. You can't build a business like that. Eventually that's going to break because you can't predict who's going to come in the door, how long it's going to take to close them. And therefore you can't hire ahead of the need to even be able to onboard them. So then you have an experience issue where now you're failing on delivery because you can't plan and you can't hire ahead. So there's actually a whole situation here where this becomes a major problem. So it is very important, even if you have a lot of referrals, it's very important that there is a pattern in what you're seeing in terms of how many leads are coming in and how long it takes to get them to become a customer, and then how long it takes for them to be onboarded. So this one is a very, very big set of problems. There's a lot of advice in the industry about this because I think it's more buzzy. So what I really tried to do is just focus on how do we get started? Where are we showing up? Where do we feel like as a founder we can show up and consistently get the message out there, get in front of people? And then where else can we show up to build value to make people come to us and trust us, really? So kind of going back to us with this very guide, I'm kind of looking at 2 different channels, and then how do we actually go about some sort of content creation? So just getting you started in this area. This is definitely an area where if you're not good at this, you can certainly outsource some of this, but it's helping you kind of decide, what am I even outsourcing? What is my strategy around how to start building this growth engine? Where are my customers? It's a huge fundamental question that people miss all the time, which is like, I have this ideal customer and I'm just posting on LinkedIn. But your ideal customer is like artists and they're not on LinkedIn, but you're doing it because all the other advisors do it because they're serving business owners. Where are they? We've heard so many success stories about people literally like Melissa on one of our last episodes, going to libraries, going to conferences where these people are, partnering, really creative partnerships. There's a lot of different opportunities, or Facebook groups. We've heard a lot of feedback on specific narrow Facebook groups. So where can you be getting in front of them just to get enough reps to get your name out there and build enough trust, really? And then how do you get started?
I think this is another area where we always talk about advisors don't give themselves enough credit if they were to really sit down and analyze, take this diagnostic and see for themselves that they can see where the issues are and put together a baseline go-to-market plan, and start to think through specific tactics that are going to be most effective and that have maybe to a certain degree worked before, and where maybe, the tactics just don't have clear structure around them. So referrals is always a great example of, if you're thinking about spending lots and lots of money on top of funnel, some sort of like lead gen plan, but you don't have really clear structure around how to tap into your existing client base and get introductions in a systematic way, then you can do that. you can sit down and kind of think through what that would look like and how you would build structure around that. So yeah, I think like you said, you can outsource a lot of the pieces, but before you do that, what do you already know? If you really sat down, took the diagnostic and looked at where there are gaps, you probably know more than you realize before you outsource anything.
Yeah, what do you know and what value do you have to give? If you've worked with some clients, you likely know what they struggle with before they meet you. So where are they when they're struggling with that? And what do you know that you could give them for free, or that in ways you could serve them to get in front of them to build that trust, to then get them to kind of come in and talk with you and give you a shot? And I do think, like, on the referrals point, referrals are awesome and you can go a long way if you have a core group, like a core set of customers, and your value prop is right and you're really delivering that alone is going to get you some growth without needing to go launch a podcast or do a social media strategy or do a seminar or whatever. Like, you're going to get some growth from that. This is really about putting resources toward growth-related activities, and then how do we actually get to a point where that's consistent? Probably outsourcing. You're not going to probably be the one running this, but you might still be that face of the brand. You might still be the one who is showing up and delivering value, basically, and someone else is like running the system.
There's a whole other side that we won't get into, but like we sort of joke about, well, wait, what if it works? And do you have process around that the sales process?
Yeah,
right?
I do get into the sales process a bit, because the sales process is a big part of it. You can set up a great marketing engine if you don't know how to close them. That's a whole other problem.
And onboard
and
them, support them, and then that.
But
goes
there you
into
go.
The rest of the
now we're back
constraints.
to another constraint. But that's the point: is you want to get this going enough, but you gotta be ready. And that's why a lot of times Growth Engine is not. If Growth Engine is tied with something else, typically the other one is the one to start with, because you don't want to have a founder constraint and Growth Engine and go with Growth Engine. Now we have just like exponential problems, and we're going to be distracted just reacting to those problems. So that's why it is important to be focused, if you have competing constraints.
Yeah. So it's not just because you can really only tackle one thing at a time. It's because that order does actually matter.
It does. Yeah.
Okay. Last but not least,
this is the one
constraint
where
number 5.
we meet people the most, I think, in terms of like their readiness to work with us, I would say. But operational complexity constraint. So this is one that is really about the internal business and how it operates and how efficient it is. So this is really like your planning, your investment management, your operational processes are too complicated, and often they're too manual. And this is creating this kind of snowball issue where you're putting all this effort into growth for a while, but then as soon as more and more customers come on, every customer that comes on is adding more operational complexity, which is turning your attention away, pulling your attention away from the growth activities and the strategic stuff. And now we're in this kind of reactive cycle where we want to be growing, but we can't figure out how to allocate resources to fix and just like kind of take the hit and fix that operational complexity enough to be able to turn our attention back to growth. And I think a really core part of this that I notice and what I go through in the guide, it's not just about like, let's identify some places to streamline or to implement technology or to use AI. It's also about making some really clear, thoughtful decisions around where we want to personalize and where we want to standardize. So this guide begins with those decisions because that is another issue is like not being able to identify where you're really driving human value versus where you can systematize, outsource, remove, streamline. That's a core fundamental starting point because then it becomes easy. Once you've made that decision, it becomes a lot easier to chip away at or to delegate to your team to chip away at all of the complexity that is unnecessary and is not providing additional value to your customers.
And whatever your process is in how the business is being run is obviously in place because for a time or leading up to this point, you believe to some degree that it's what's helping you deliver the value that you're delivering to the customer. It's creating the customer experience. So it's all the inner workings to present and deliver things to your clients. So like other points from earlier in this conversation, the ability to step back and diagnose how inefficient is this like when you really can take a beat. And it's my story of, my dad building a very, very successful wealth business, but me coming in many years later after it beginning to very annoyingly, I'm sure, but with sort of fresh eyes, see, silliness in how processes were built. That is nobody's fault, but it happens because you are trying to deliver this value and it just sort of stacks on itself. So, it is the Seeds origin story of what we were doing specifically with the investment management part of our services was a multi-month, multi-step, multi-technology process that had stacked on itself for decades that, again, ironically, was not delivering the type of customer experience that I think we presumed it was. And so being able to rip it apart and say, well, why couldn't this multi-month process be, a week? Why can't these 10 tools be one? But even before you get to the tools part, just what are the steps and the basic process moments internally to go from an intro meeting with the prospective client to delivering an investment proposal to implementing that to then continuing to manage that. We had to look at the existing schematic really thoroughly and say, is this really, serving our value to the client?
Yeah, for sure.
But it's hard. Because it's work, what the thing is? It's with growth. Sometimes it feels like it's working well enough, which we hear a lot from advisors, right? Well, I am growing. I am, able to add clients, and that may be true, but that actually sort of obfuscates sometimes these bigger operational challenges, and again, it stacks up over time.
Yeah. I also think like a little other call out on this is a lot of times after the founder is somewhat removed, this kind of becomes a back burner thing where you don't realize the amount of drag on your business if it's spread across multiple people, basically. So I do think this is something where knowing where you want to provide customization, personalization, flexibility to kind of play and deliver different things to different customers is important. But additionally, like being really honest and asking your team and asking your customers what's driving value and what's not is going to go a long way here. Because if you can't grow because you have so much complexity behind the scenes that resources cannot be allocated, because ultimately, like what ends up happening is like you don't have enough margin, like you're not profitable enough on these customers to then invest in these other areas related to marketing or hiring or whatever you need to do, because you're just drowning in crap and you just have like all these people doing all these manual weird things or making independent one-off decisions instead of just having a streamlined, consistent process that you know for sure, because you've gotten the feedback, delivers that valuable experience that's then going to drive the value prop and the growth engine constraints and further support further hiring, etc. So this one will come up and pop up again and again. You don't want to over-engineer this early either, because it doesn't make sense, because you don't know what's working. You don't know what's driving value. But once something is working, it is something where you need to turn your attention and look at where can I streamline, before I just go hiring a bunch of people, or buying a bunch of technology. You definitely need to take a minute and reflect in this area.
So again, to your point, this is where we, as potential Seeds customers, where we hopefully meet them. They're at that moment. Okay, Kelsey, where will people be able to actually find this thing, do the diagnostic, get the results, and solve all of their business challenges?
Oh yeah, easy. Just solve all your business challenges. On our website. So we will probably be posting all over social media. I'll be posting and then stressing out about my posting about this on social media. We'll send emails out, but it's going to be on our website, the link to the diagnostic, and then the diagnostic's going to kick out a set of emails. So an email with the actual workbook, but also a couple additional emails with some bonus resources, some additional information as you kind of get started unblocking these different constraints. And one last note, we didn't cover it, but if you score low on all of these constraints, there is a guide on creating that flywheel. So that's what happens if you're really just crushing it and you're still not growing, but you're not constrained. Then this is really about investing in what's working and how do we build that flywheel and how do we remove friction so we can grow faster. And so there is also a path for that as well.
And I'll be taking it myself to fix our own problems. All right, I'm excited. This was awesome. Everybody go check it out. Reach out to us with questions, and we'll see you next time.